throughout my childhood. All of them were very young, and he always treated them horribly. Victoria was also 18 or 19, and she came from a very poor family. I hated her at first, because I thought she was a gold digger. After a few months, she moved into her house, and talks about marriage started. By this point, I had started to get to know her better, and I realized that she was a very sweet and smart girl. Sometimes I would talk with her for hours. She wanted to break out of her poverty-stricken life and her toxic family, and my father was the best chance for her. She was very grateful to him for giving her this new life. But I knew my father, and I saw how he was treating her. He would never let her go anywhere, and if we had guests, he would always talk over her. I wanted to save her because I knew how it would end. My father would leave her as soon as she stopped being convenient for him. And honestly, that wasn't the only reason I wanted to help. I had started to feel like I liked her. I was seeing how unhappy she was locked up in this big house, so when my father was busy working, I would try to make her happier. I would take her to the movies or to cafes or even on a simple walk through the park. And she was always smiling and laughing during our time together. However, as soon as we came home and my father would return, she would be unhappy again, never smiling or laughing. Once we returned from the movies, and for some reason my father was home early, he was angry and asked what was happening. I tried to explain to him that I was just trying to make Victoria more comfortable. After all, she was a part of our family and technically my stepmother. He warned us that if something like this ever happened again, everyone would face repercussions. And I would have to leave his house because I was already 18. Victoria was scared, and I was angry. He was acting like she was his property. Over the next few weeks, Victoria barely spoke to me, and I felt terrible because I had feelings for her. At the same time, I realized that I simply couldn't live with this horrible man anymore, who never cared for me, my mom, or anyone else except himself. I decided that it was time for me to leave the house for good, and to start my own life. But I didn't want to leave Victoria. I told her that we could run away together since she wasn't married to him. He would just play with her and leave her with nothing, just like he did with every other woman in his life. I started to pack my things slowly and to plan where I would go next. I tried to slowly work on it for several days because I hoped that Victoria would finally agree to come with me. And one day, she came into my room and shyly asked if I had a plan. I told her all about it. I had friends and contacts everywhere and some money saved. We could start working, then try to get an education, and slowly build the life that we
Oh,
wanted.
guys, good.
She finally agreed to leave with me. She collected her stuff very quickly. She didn't have a lot of it, to be honest. All this time, she was looking around, scared that father would return any minute. We finally finished up packing up the rest of our things and left for the bus station to catch a bus to another city where one of my friends had offered to take us in for a while. I was so happy on the way there. I knew that our life wouldn't be easy, but it was so much better than living with a man like my father. I actually felt guilty that I didn't do this sooner and lived with him for so many years while knowing how bad he was. Victoria was completely silent the whole time. I tried to cheer her up and she tried to smile. She was definitely frightened. When we arrived at the bus station, I kept trying to calm her down and tell her that she wasn't alone. We hugged and it felt so right. We had around half an hour until our bus would arrive. I went to the restroom and returned after like 5 minutes, and there was no Victoria anywhere. Only
Attack time! Did you just attack my village? Attack!
You just took revenge on me.
I was worried that maybe someone had kidnapped her, or even that my father came and took her away. I was so angry and ready to do anything to keep her away from him. After a little while, I got a text message. It was Victoria. She said that she was really grateful for everything I tried to do for her, but she had decided to return to my father because at least she would have a stable life that way. I was crushed. I thought about returning to get her, but it was her decision. Nobody had forced her to make it. So I sat on the bus, set off toward a new life. And I wasn't sure if I was happy about it. After a few days, my father called me. He was aware of everything that had happened. He said he didn't care if I left, but that Victoria had begged him to at least give me some money. I thought about it. I really wanted it because, of course, I needed the money, but I knew it wasn't right. So I said, I don't need anything from you. sure he didn't expect that. He liked the idea that I would still be dependent on him, exactly the same as the other people in his life. He said, okay, and that was it. That was the last time I talked with my father. 6 months has passed since that conversation, and I'm working where I can and trying to learn to code in my free time. Maybe someday I'll be able to go to school. But for now, I want to prove to my father that I don't need him. I also want to visit my mom as soon as possible. I can't let this happen.
दूसरे आपको कुछ ट्रिक्स दिखा सकते हैं.
About Victoria.
ओलंप
Choose our own paths. What kind of difficulties do you have in your life right now? Please share them
Nothing,
in the comments.
bitch.
Don't forget to like this video. Hello, I'm Randy. I'm 17 now, but the story that I want to share with you happened a few years ago when I was only 13. This was the hardest and the most awful period of my life. I should probably start this talk talking about the death of my closest friend. Michael was 14, and he'd been suffering from a severe disability since he was born. He had a very weak immune system, and it was so bad that he couldn't even go to school. As a matter of fact, I was the only person his age that he could speak to. Not only were we friends, but our parents also had a really close relationship since we lived next door to each other. Some of our neighbors even assumed that we were all one family. We spent each and every holiday together, and oftentimes I stayed the night at Michael's house. So, we were brothers, and even though I knew some other guys, like, from school, he was the closest friend I'd ever had in my life. Even though everybody knew that Michael was going to die as a kid, it was really hard to swallow when he actually passed. I remember right after the funeral, while his and my parents were busy with their adult stuff, I snuck to Michael's room. Everything there was exactly the same way it was when he was still alive. Michael used to sit on the windowsill and look out at our street, waiting for me to visit him after school. So I just sat there, trying to remember every single detail of our friendship. I hadn't even realized that I'd fallen asleep, but I do remember that I had a dream about Michael, and he was there next to me in his room, and he said he was happy because he no longer felt any dads never fought over a football game, things like that. I tried to ask my mom what was going on, but she would say that I was too young to understand. I remember once when my dad was at work and my mom was doing something with her daisies in the garden. Michael's mom had come over. Apparently there was no one except me in the kitchen, so she just came up and sat down nearby and started asking some regular questions about school and stuff. For a second I felt as if nothing had ever changed between our two families. But then my mom saw us talking. She'd gotten really nervous and told her former best friend to leave us alone in a very rude way. Then she told me to go to my room and never talk to Michael's parents again. I was totally confused, but I decided not to argue with her. To be honest, I'd never seen my mom that furious before. A few days later, it was already late and I had practically fallen asleep when I'd heard some voices downstairs. It seemed like my parents were arguing about something in a loud whisper, so to speak. I'd gotten curious and I went to find out what was going on. I saw my parents and Michael's, and everyone seemed to be worried and angry. I stayed hidden over the stairs to try to hear what all the fighting was about. Suddenly, my dad looked up the stairs and noticed me. I guess all four grown-ups had finally come to the conclusion that I finally had to know everything, because Michael's parents almost immediately disappeared, and so my parents invited me to the kitchen. What happened afterward changed my view of everything and everyone that I thought I had known. My parents told me that many years ago, Michael's mom had given birth to another boy. She and her husband had already had a son who was sick, and they'd been trying for almost a year to cope with 2 children. But then their financial troubles began. They didn't know what they were going to do, and that's when my parents bought a house next to theirs. Our two families had become friends, and Michael's parents had found out that their new neighbors couldn't have their own babies due to some medical issues. That's how the idea was born, to have them adopt their second child. Anyway, their plan had been implemented, and the two couples were happy having not only a shared fence, but a common son. But when Michael died and his parents decided to move away, they wanted their second son to stay close to him. And this meant that he had to know the truth. But his legal parents were not ready for that. At first, I didn't get that that whole story was about me. And I thought that I was still sleeping. It couldn't be true that my mom and dad were actually not my mom and dad. And that our neighbors were my real parents. I mean, yeah, we'd always been close, our two families, and Michael and I had been like brothers. Wait a minute. We actually were brothers, as it now turned out. And I just lost my only blood sibling. I felt like I was totally lost. Of course, Mom and Dad, I mean, the ones I've been living with, tried to calm me down and find the right words to explain everything, but I couldn't stop crying. The only thing I wanted back then was for Michael to be alive, so we could run away together from these grown-up liars. Time has passed. My life has sort of gotten back to normal. Michael's parents, I'll keep calling them that so you don't get confused, finally sold their house and moved somewhere else. And the family that bought it also had a son who was my age, and we've become friends. And I finally felt relief, because I guess there's nothing harder in the world than living in uncertainty. I've had plenty of talks about everything with my mom and dad since then. They even took me to a child psychologist for a couple of months. To be frank, if I were them, I'd probably done the same thing. And I would have tried to keep this kind of secret for as long as I could. We haven't been in touch with Michael's parents for years, but 2 weeks ago I received a letter from Australia. It was from them, and it was the longest letter I've ever seen in my life. All in all, it included their apologies to me for everything. And it was about their life in Sydney, and about their depression of falling apart with my mom and dad. And they also kindly asked the three of us to come and visit them there. They even promised to buy us tickets as soon as we decide on the dates. So now I'm packing my stuff to go to Australia for a whole month. Who knows? Maybe my next story here will be about this trip.
Hi guys, I'm Haley, and I'm 13 years old. Since early childhood, we're all aware of what good and evil means, and I want to tell you a story about the darkest evil I have ever faced in my life. It all started.
Oi, salah apu na, apu kute,
I've been waiting for that surgery
mute, apu,
Stop! This is a Nadia game, right? It's stupid.
So my parents suggested that I spend my summer break at my aunt's farmhouse.